The air in the grand ballroom fizzed with a mixture of expensive champagne and forced enthusiasm. It was the annual Sterling Corp Awards night, an event designed to celebrate achievement but which often felt more like a gladiator's arena, where careers were either crowned with laurels or quietly left to bleed out in the shadows. Richard sat at a round table draped in a stiff white cloth, a carefully constructed smile fixed on his face. The golden light from the crystal chandeliers overhead seemed to mock the tired lines around his eyes. He had spent 15 years at Sterling Corp, pouring his soul into project after project, often at the expense of time with the one person who mattered most. Beside him, a small hand rested on his arm. Emily, his 8-year-old daughter, looked around with wide, curious eyes, trying to make sense of this strange universe of adults. Her dress, a simple blue velvet that she had chosen herself, was a splash of pure, unblemished color in a sea of corporate black and gray. Bringing her tonight had been a last-minute decision. His wife was out of town, the babysitter had canceled, and a small, hopeful part of Richard had thought, let her see what I do. Let her be proud. Now he wasn't so sure. The event felt less like a celebration and more like a tribunal. "Daddy, are you going to get a shiny trophy?" Emily whispered, her voice a tiny bell in the cacophony of polite laughter and clinking glasses. Richard squeezed her hand gently. "I don't know, sweetie. There's one award left. The big one. The Innovator of the Year." His heart hammered against his ribs. The Innovator of the Year. It was more than just a title or a bonus. It was validation. This year, it was supposed to be his. He had spearheaded Project Starlight, a revolutionary logistics system that had already saved the company millions. It was his brainchild, born from countless sleepless nights and weekends spent hunched over a laptop while Emily played quietly in the next room. His team knew it. His direct supervisors knew it. The results screamed it. Mr. Peterson, the CEO, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes, was on stage now. He was a master of corporate theater, his voice booming with false sincerity as he spoke of passion and dedication. Richard had had countless meetings with Peterson about Starlight, presenting data, running simulations, and proving its efficacy. Peterson had always seemed impressed, nodding along and promising his full support. "This award," Peterson declared, pausing for dramatic effect, "recognizes the individual who has not just met expectations but shattered them. Someone whose vision has propelled this company forward." Richard instinctively straightened his tie. He caught the eye of a few colleagues at nearby tables. They gave him subtle nods, encouraging smiles. They knew. Everyone knew. He felt a surge of pride, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the wine. He imagined walking onto that stage, the spotlight finding him, and looking out to see Emily's face, shining with adoration. That was the real prize. "The winner of this year's Innovator of the Year award," Peterson boomed, tearing open the golden envelope, "is Mark Renshaw." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. Mark Renshaw? Mark worked in marketing. A good talker, a man who knew how to sell an idea, but he had nothing to do with the intricate, back-breaking work of creating Starlight. A wave of confusion washed over the room, a collective, silent gasp that was quickly smothered by polite, obligatory applause. Richard's own hands felt like lead weights on the table. He couldn't bring himself to clap. He watched, stunned, as Renshaw, looking utterly shocked himself, made his way to the stage, patting Richard on the back as he passed. "Tough break, old man," he muttered, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. The lights seemed too bright, the sounds too loud. Richard's smile had melted away, replaced by a numb, hollow mask. He felt Emily's gaze on him, but he couldn't bring himself to meet it. The shame was a bitter taste in his mouth. What must she be thinking? Her father, the man she looked up to, sitting here while another man accepted the prize for his work. As the ceremony ended and people began to stand, a polite stream of colleagues came by. "You were robbed, Richard," one said. "We all know Starlight was yours," whispered another. The words were kind, but they only sharpened the sting of the injustice. Finally, the crowd began to thin. The grand ballroom felt empty and cavernous. Richard sat still, the celebratory confetti on the floor looking like colorful ash. He had to face his daughter. He turned to her slowly, a carefully prepared excuse already forming on his lips. But Emily spoke first. She wasn't looking at the stage or at the departing crowd. She was looking right at him, her brow furrowed with a profound, innocent confusion that only a child could possess. Her voice was small but clear, cutting through the noise in his head. "Daddy," she asked, her blue eyes searching his, "why didn't they clap for you?" The simple, honest question landed with devastating force. In that moment, the entire room seemed to freeze. Mr. Peterson, who had been shaking hands with board members nearby, stopped mid-sentence. His head snapped in their direction. Richard saw his boss's face, usually a mask of calm authority, drain of all color. The CEO's eyes met Richard's, and in them, Richard saw not anger, but a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. The board members turned, their gazes following Peterson's, landing on the small girl in the blue velvet dress and her father, who suddenly felt like the most powerful man in the room. For a long moment that stretched into an eternity, the only sound was the distant clatter of dishes being cleared away by catering staff, oblivious to the high-stakes drama unfolding in the center of the room. The board members, a Mount Rushmore of stern, wealthy faces, looked from Peterson to Richard, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning suspicion. They were sharks who smelled blood in the water, and Peterson's sudden pallor was a chum slick. Mr. Peterson recovered first, his corporate mask sliding back into place, though the smile was a fraction too tight. He began walking towards Richard and Emily, his steps measured, deliberate. It was a walk Richard had seen 1,000 times down the long hallways of Sterling Corp., a walk that usually preceded a firing or a corporate dismantling. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like a retreat. "Well, hello there," Peterson said, his voice a smooth, buttery slick of practiced charm. He crouched down to Emily's level, ignoring Richard entirely. "That's a very smart question, young lady. A very smart question indeed." Emily, unintimidated, simply stared at him, awaiting an answer. The directness of a child's gaze was a weapon Peterson was unprepared for. "You see," Peterson began, his eyes flicking up to Richard and then to the board members who were now unabashedly watching the exchange. "In a big company, lots of people contribute to a project. We all clap for the person who accepts the award, but we're really clapping for the whole team. Your daddy is one of our most valuable team members, an absolute star." It was a masterful deflection, a textbook example of corporate spin. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Emily's question had been the water that made it sprout. Richard found his voice, a low, steady tone that surprised even himself. He placed a protective hand on Emily's shoulder. "I think it's past your bedtime, sweetie. Let's go home." He stood up, gathering Emily's small coat. He didn't look at Peterson. He looked at the board members one by one, holding their gazes for a brief, significant moment. He didn't need to say a word. His silence, his dignity in the face of public humiliation, was more damning than any accusation he could have hurled. He gave a single, polite nod to the group, a gesture that was both a farewell and a challenge. Then, holding his daughter's hand tightly, he walked away, leaving Mr. Peterson crouched alone on the confetti-strewn floor. The car ride home was quiet at first. The city lights streaked past, a blur of neon and concrete. Richard could feel the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, something new, a flicker of resolve. "Daddy?" Emily's voice came from the back seat. "Yes, Pumpkin?" "That man, Mr. Peterson." He didn't answer my question. Richard glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was serious, her brow still furrowed in thought. The lie had not satisfied her. The evasion had not fooled her. "No, he didn't," Richard said softly. "Why did that other man take your trophy?" He knew his answer to this was important. It would shape how she saw the world, how she understood fairness and work and honesty. He could tell her the world was unfair. He could tell her that sometimes bad people win. But looking at her earnest, trusting face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. "Because," Richard began, choosing his words with immense care, "sometimes people get confused. They forget who did the real work. And the man who took it? I think he was just as surprised as I was. But the most important thing isn't the shiny trophy, sweetie. It's knowing you did a good job. It's being able to look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of what you built." "Like Project Starlight?" she asked. The name sounded impossibly big and technical coming from her. Richard smiled, a genuine smile for the first time that night. "Exactly like Project Starlight. Are you going to tell them they made a mistake?" There it was. The simple, direct, devastating logic of a child. You don't let people take what is yours. You don't let a mistake stand. You fix it. "Yes," Richard heard himself say, the word solidifying his resolve into a concrete plan. "Yes, I am." When they got home, he tucked Emily into bed, reading her an extra chapter of her favorite book. She fell asleep with her hand curled around his finger, her face peaceful. He looked down at her, the fierce, protective love he felt for her a burning fire in his chest. He wasn't just fighting for a title or a bonus anymore. He was fighting for the world he wanted her to grow up in. A world where work mattered, where truth was valued, and where you didn't let a bully take what you had earned. After she was asleep, he went not to his own bed, but to his home office. The room was his sanctuary, lined with books on engineering and logistics. He sat down at his desk and powered on his computer. The faint hum of the machine was a comforting sound. For years, he had channeled his discipline and intellect into building things for Sterling Corp. Tonight, he would channel them into building a case. He opened his email, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He searched for Starlight. Peterson. Renshaw. He pulled up the project management files, the version histories, the server logs, every email, every memo, every line of code, every blueprint. He had documented everything meticulously, a habit born of professional pride. Now it was his arsenal. He worked for hours, the city outside growing dark and quiet. He compiled a timeline, attaching documentary evidence to every key milestone. The initial proposal, written by him. The feasibility study, conducted by his team. The progress reports, sent weekly to Peterson's office. The final implementation plan, bearing his digital signature. And then, the smoking gun. A series of emails from the marketing department, dated only a few weeks ago, in which Mark Renshaw was asked to familiarize himself with Starlight's key talking points for a potential promotional push. Renshaw hadn't built a thing. He had been brought in at the last minute to learn how to talk about it. As the first hints of dawn touched the sky, Richard leaned back in his chair. He had it. A clear, irrefutable, undeniable mountain of evidence. He knew what he had to do next. He wasn't going to leak it to the press. He wasn't going to post it on social media. That wasn't his style. He was going to use the system that Peterson had built, the corporate structure itself, as his weapon. He was going to present his case directly to the people who mattered, the board. The sun rose, casting long shadows across Richard's home office. He was exhausted, running on the fumes of black coffee and a righteous fury that had simmered into a cold, hard resolve. The mountain of evidence he had assembled sat on his desktop, a digital testament to his 15 years of discipline and integrity. He felt no fear, only a strange, serene clarity. He was no longer a supplicant, hoping for a scrap of recognition from the corporate table. He was a man who had built the table, and he was about to flip it over. His first move had to be precise. Emailing the entire board of directors would be a messy, emotional volley that could easily be dismissed as the rantings of a disgruntled employee. He needed a sniper's precision, not a shotgun blast. He navigated to the investor relations section of the Sterling Corp website, a public-facing portal he rarely had reason to visit. There, listed in plain sight, were the names and titles of the board members. He scanned the list, passing over the names he knew were Peterson's cronies, men who owed their positions to the CEO. He stopped at one name, Eleanor Vance, lead independent director. Richard remembered her from the ceremony. She was an older woman, sharp and watchful, with a reputation for being fiercely intelligent and utterly incorruptible. She hadn't applauded enthusiastically for Renshaw. She had clapped with a polite, almost analytical detachment, her eyes scanning the room. She was the one. He composed the email with the same care he would have used for a critical project blueprint. The subject line was clinical, powerful, urgent request for a meeting regarding Project Starlight and corporate governance. The body of the email was brief, respectful, and devoid of emotion. Dear Mrs. Vance, my name is Richard Hale, and I am the Senior Project Manager for Advanced Logistics at Sterling Corp. I am writing to you today regarding a matter of critical importance to the company's intellectual property integrity and corporate governance. As you witnessed at last night's award ceremony, the Innovator of the Year award was given for the creation and implementation of Project Starlight. The public attribution for this project does not align with the factual record of its development. I have compiled a comprehensive brief, including internal communications, project logs, and a detailed timeline that clearly establishes the project's true authorship. The misrepresentation of this achievement poses a significant risk to shareholder value and employee morale. I respectfully request a brief 15-minute meeting with you to present this evidence. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Richard Hale. He attached the single password-protected PDF file containing his evidence. He typed the password in a separate short email. The password is integrity. He hit send on both, his heart steady. The die was cast. He spent the next hour getting Emily ready for school. The mundane routine of making toast and quizzing her on spelling words was a comforting anchor in the storm he had just unleashed. As he dropped her off at the school gate, she gave him a fierce hug. "You're going to fix it today, right, Daddy?" I'm going to try my best, Pumpkin, he said, his voice thick with emotion. As he drove away, his phone buzzed. It wasn't a call from Eleanor Vance. It was an email from Human Resources. The subject line was a cold slap. Urgent meeting, performance review. It was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Peterson's office. Richard smiled grimly. It was faster than he'd expected. Peterson wasn't just trying to control the narrative. He was trying to decapitate it before it could even speak. This wasn't a performance review. It was an execution. At precisely 10 a.m., Richard walked into Peterson's office. The CEO was not alone. The head of HR, a man named Henderson who had the cheerful demeanor of an undertaker, sat beside the desk, a leather-bound folder in front of him. "Richard, thank you for coming," Peterson began, his tone dripping with false concern. "We were very troubled by the events of last night. Your public display of discontent. It's not the Sterling way. We're a team here." Richard remained silent, his hands clasped calmly behind his back. He let the accusation hang in the air. "Frankly," Peterson continued, leaning forward, "it's the culmination of a pattern of behavior that suggests you're no longer a good fit for our corporate culture. Your focus has been slipping. Your attitude has been less than collaborative." It was a pathetic, transparent fabrication. Henderson, the HR man, opened his folder, ready to chime in with a pre-written litany of non-existent complaints. Richard decided to end the farce. "Was I uncollaborative when I designed the system architecture for Starlight? Was my focus slipping when I worked 60-hour weeks to debug the beta version?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. Peterson was taken aback by the direct confrontation. "That's not the point, Richard." "That is the only point," Richard replied. He took a step closer to the desk. "You're right, this is an execution, but you're aiming the gun at the wrong person." Peterson scoffed, but a flicker of unease crossed his face. "We have a very generous severance package for you. I suggest you take it and move on quietly." "I'm not interested in your severance package, Mr. Peterson," Richard said calmly. "And I won't be moving on. Not quietly, anyway." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You see, I'm rather looking forward to my meeting with Mrs. Vance and the board. I sent her my own performance review this morning, a review of Project Starlight's creation. She must have found it compelling reading." The color drained from Peterson's face. The mask of control didn't just slip, it shattered. He looked at Henderson, who seemed utterly lost, his script now useless. He looked back at Richard, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and genuine fear. He had been outmaneuvered, his corporate ambush turned into a trap for himself. As if on cue, the intercom on Peterson's desk buzzed. His assistant's voice, tinny and nervous, filled the silent office. "Mr. Peterson, I have Mrs. Vance on the line for you. She says it's urgent." Peterson's hand, usually so steady when signing million-dollar contracts, trembled as he jabbed the speakerphone button. The disembodied voice of Eleanor Vance sliced through the heavy silence of the office. It was crisp, devoid of warmth, and carried the unmistakable authority of old money and earned power. "Peterson," she began, dispensing with any pretense of politeness, "I have received an email from Mr. Richard Hale. I have also reviewed the document he attached. I found the password illuminating." Richard stood motionless, a silent observer to the dismantling of a king. "The evidence presented," Vance continued, her voice as sharp as broken glass, "is not just compelling, it is overwhelming. It raises serious, and I mean serious, questions about executive oversight, ethical conduct, and the fundamental integrity of our internal reporting. There are potential shareholder implications here that I find deeply disturbing." Peterson opened his mouth, a sputtering protest forming on his lips, but Vance cut him off. "I am convening an emergency meeting of the available board members. Not tomorrow. Not this afternoon. Now. We will meet in the main boardroom in 1 hour. I expect you to be there. I expect Mr. Hale to be there. And Peterson, get me Mark Renshaw. I want him there too. Do you understand?" She didn't wait for a reply. The line went dead, leaving a dial tone buzzing in the cavernous silence. The sound was a fitting soundtrack for the end of an era. Peterson slumped in his chair, the carefully constructed edifice of his power crumbling around him in real time. He looked at Richard, his eyes pleading, pathetic. The apex predator had become cornered prey. "Richard," he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We can fix this. We can make a deal." Richard simply shook his head, a gesture not of anger but of pity. "You don't get it, do you? This was never about a deal. It was about the work." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving Peterson and the HR man to contemplate the wreckage. The hour passed in a blur. Richard called his wife, his voice calm as he explained the situation. He felt her quiet, unwavering support through the phone line, a bedrock beneath the shifting sands of his professional life. At 11 o'clock, he walked into the main boardroom. It was an imposing space, dominated by a long mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen. Eleanor Vance sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 other board members, their faces grim and unreadable. They were the Mount Rushmore Richard had seen at the ceremony, but today they were not spectators. They were judges. Peterson was already there, huddled at the far end of the table, looking small and diminished. A few seats away sat Mark Renshaw, the hapless marketing man, who looked pale and profoundly uncomfortable, as if he had wandered into the wrong movie. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Hale," Vance said, her voice commanding the room. "Please have a seat." She gestured to a chair directly across from her, a position of honor, of significance. Richard sat. "We have all reviewed your brief," Vance said, gesturing to the tablets in front of each board member. "It is thorough. However, for the record, I would like you to summarize your position." Richard stood up. He felt a profound sense of calm. He was not a disgruntled employee here to complain. He was an engineer, here to report a catastrophic system failure. "Mrs. Vance, members of the board," he began, his voice steady and clear. "This isn't about a trophy. It's about the foundation of this company. We tell our people we value innovation. We tell our shareholders we are leaders in our field. We tell ourselves that we are a meritocracy. What happened at the award ceremony wasn't just an oversight. It was a lie. It told every single person in that room that the truth doesn't matter, that the work doesn't matter, that all that matters is the story, the spin, even if it's hollow." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I led the team that built Project Starlight. We poured thousands of hours into it. We solved problems that were deemed unsolvable. We created millions of dollars in value for this company. I brought my 8-year-old daughter to that ceremony because I wanted her to be proud of me. Instead, she just saw a man take credit for my work, and she asked me why." His gaze moved from the board members and landed on Peterson. She asked a question that the CEO of this company couldn't answer. "That should concern all of you." He then walked them through the timeline, the emails, the server logs. He presented the facts with the dispassionate precision of a scientist. It was undeniable, irrefutable. When he finished, silence once again filled the room. Vance turned her steely gaze on the marketer. "Mr. Renshaw, what was your role in Project Starlight?" Renshaw crumbled instantly. I work in marketing," he stammered. "Mr. Peterson's office. They just told me to get up to speed on the project's talking points. They said they wanted me to represent it at the ceremony. I had no idea. I swear, I thought I was just accepting it on behalf of the team. I was as shocked as anyone when they called my name as the innovator." All eyes turned to Peterson. He tried to rally, to deploy the corporate bluster that had served him so well for decades. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding, a simple communications breakdown. Richard has always been a valued, if somewhat sensitive member of the team. We were merely trying to elevate the project's profile." Eleanor Vance leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "A communications breakdown, Peterson. Mr. Hale's evidence shows a deliberate, calculated effort to transfer credit for a cornerstone innovation away from its creator and to a marketing employee, presumably to bolster a narrative you felt was more palatable. You didn't just break down communication, you broke faith. With your employees, with this board, and with our shareholders." She straightened up, her voice dropping to a decisive, final tone. "This board has a fiduciary duty to protect this company. Your actions have put it at risk. We have lost confidence in your leadership. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave. A full independent investigation will be conducted, but I suggest you have your lawyer contact our general counsel to discuss the terms of your resignation." It was over. The king was deposed. Vance then turned her attention to Richard. Her expression softened, just slightly. "Mr. Hale, on behalf of the board of directors and the entire company, I want to offer you our sincerest apology. What you and your team accomplished with Project Starlight is extraordinary. And what you did today took a different, but no less important kind of courage." She smiled. A thin, genuine smile. "The Innovator of the Year award and its accompanying bonus will be publicly and officially reassigned to you and the members of your team. And that brings me to my final point. We need to ensure this never happens again. We need to foster genuine innovation, not just talk about it. To that end, the board has just created a new position. Vice President of Innovation and Logistics. The role will have oversight of all new strategic development and will report directly to the CEO. We would like to offer it to you." Richard was speechless. He had come here seeking justice, not a promotion. He had come to fix a problem, and they were handing him the authority to rebuild the entire system. Yes, he managed to say. "I accept." A week later, Richard sat in his new office. It was larger, with a window that overlooked the city. The Innovator of the Year trophy sat on a polished credenza, gleaming under the afternoon sun. But Richard wasn't looking at it. He was looking at a small framed drawing on his wall, right next to his degrees. It was a picture, rendered in the beautifully clumsy scrawl of a child's crayon. It showed a tall man with brown hair holding hands with a small girl in a blue dress. They were walking away from a big, gray, lopsided building. Above the drawing, in wobbly, earnest letters, Emily had written, "My daddy, the fixer." A knock came at his open door. It was Eleanor Vance, now the interim CEO. "Settling in, Richard?" she asked. "Trying to," he smiled. "It's a different view." "It is," she agreed. Her eyes fell on the drawing. She smiled. "That, right there, is why we made the right choice. You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for a world you want your daughter to live in." Richard nodded, his throat tight with emotion. That was always the real prize. "I have to get to a meeting," she said, turning to leave. "Don't stay too late. The work will be here tomorrow." He looked at the clock. It was 5:30. He packed his briefcase, turned off the lights, and headed home. He was going to be on time for dinner. He had fixed the broken thing at work. But more importantly, he had protected the precious, perfect thing he had at home. And as he walked out of the Sterling Corp Tower, a free man, he knew he had never been more innovative in his life.